Hello everyone, my name is Paul Moorcroft. I'm head of the consumer sector at Eversheds Sutherland, and I'm here with Andrew Todd, who, like myself, is a fellow real estate disputes guy, an expert in retail property. Hi Andrew, we were going to talk about contractual termination issues, but I think there's been quite a lot going on in terms of landlord enforcement. Do you want to just update everybody about where we are with that?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Well, we obviously had the announcement last Thursday night from the government, which gave a lot of protection to commercial tenants. A couple of issues really which flow in from that. Number one, it's not actually legislation. So I think the reality is it's probably there's a de facto moratorium on the ability to issue winding up petitions and produce statutory demands. So there isn't actually any legislation. Point two, it's going to be interesting to see what it actually says, because the government circular suggested that tenants should pay what they can. And in my mind, that's pretty difficult to legislate for. I mean, the final point as well, it's we know the high street's affected, obviously, retail tenants, and everybody's sympathetic towards it, obviously. What about landlords? There's going to be some problem cases with landlords out there. So maybe the government needs to look at some intervention on that front and give some protection to commercial landlords, certainly in relation to their borrowings and loan covenants. What do you think?
I suppose we've had the update on Saturday, haven't we, from the government about what periods are covered. So I think it's stat demands, which are served from the 1st of March, will be covered. So that everything that relates to the March quarter date rent should be covered. I suppose on the landlord point, it'd just be interesting to see whether we see landlord insolvencies, because a lot of the retail landlords weren't in a good financial shape going into this, were they?
Well, that's right. I mean, we've seen share prices for quite a few well-known names drop dramatically, and it'd be bitterly disappointing if some landlords go. And it's important. I mean, I've seen quite a good spirit of collaboration between landlords and tenants throughout. I think that came out in the government circular as well. But needless to say, there's some instances where cash is king, cash flow is important, and you can see some institutional landlords are having to push some tenants and say, well, we think you can afford to pay. So, as I say, watch this space in relation to legislation. I think in relation to winding up petitions, the relevant date is the 27th of April. So anything which is presented after that date is, in essence, subject to the moratorium. So the next couple of months are going to be interesting indeed in relation to landlord insolvency. The other thing which came out last week was CRA. Do you want to just update everybody in relation to that?
Yeah, so the regulations have come out, haven't they? And as far as the retailers are concerned, I mean, whilst the shops are shut, the bailiffs can't go in anyway. But once they open, then CRA is a potential remedy for a landlord. And what the new regulations say is that if there's a rent that's outstanding for less than 90 days, then a landlord's going to be stopped from sending the bailiffs in. So I suppose the interesting point there is that a full quarter's rent is normally more than 90 days. If you're a retailer, you're going to have to keep your rent arrears under that 90-day limit in order to be protected. I mean, I suppose the obvious point is that tenants aren't off the hook for this rent, and most leases will have punitive interest clauses, won't they? So there will be a cost to pay, although presumably for retailers looking to preserve cash, it'll be a lesser of two evils, really.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the net effect of all this is we're just pushing a few problems down the line, probably towards end of June. I think that's when we'll see some issues come out in the market. Will there be liquidity back in the market at that stage if some shops are opened? Hopefully so. As I say, because it's important, really, sort of spirit of collaboration, but the government really has moved quite significantly towards retailers to give them some particular protections in place. But I suspect a few institutional landlords will want to see a bit more love shown towards them at the moment.
Yeah. I suppose we saw so much activity in terms of the advice we're giving to clients around the March quarter date. Then you're right, it'll be when the June quarter date rocks around, we'll be into the same cycle. It'll be interesting as well. I mean, in terms of whether you're able to get access to the court, it's all very well having remedies and rights, but you've got to be able to get before a judge. I mean, what do you foresee any problems with that?
Yeah, a load. Absolutely. I mean, there's going to be a blockage in the court system. There just isn't the capacity there. And I think Certain members of the judiciary have indicated that so far. So I've been suggesting that people need to look at ADR, different dispute resolution models, whether that's arbitration, expert determination, essentially speedy expert determination, so parties agreeing to written submissions and then maybe an online hearing, a remote hearing. If I'm trying to draw positives out of the position, I think that's good. It's engendered a layer of creativity, which perhaps was needed in the profession. And it's probably going to be the new norm. So if people need a rapid decision through a variety of reasons, I can see arbitration expert determination being a perfectly acceptable alternative to a court system which is really clogged up.
I suppose we're seeing the courts do plenty of online hearings, but we don't quite know how they were struggling before with resources. So it's obviously this problem has just made it far, far worse, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a 20-year push since 1999 to move things out of the court system anyway, quite rightly so. Raised to ADR since the civil procedure rules and the reforms came in sort of late 98. That push will continue more so. And in reality, we're all going to have to move towards sort of a greater use of ADR and online dispute resolution anyway, and sort of bring clients along the journey with us.
Well, it'd be interesting, I suppose, to see whether our transactional client colleagues are building those clauses into the property documentation, because I suppose that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. I mean, we've picked up on that, I think, over the last 3 or 4 years anyway, in relation to some of the sort of the contract termination products we've produced, and invited people to look at slightly different models rather than just court process. So I'd probably suggest we're a little bit ahead of the game in relation to some of our transactional documents, but there's still room to grow, certainly.
And what else? I mean, we've talked about all sorts of different issues, haven't we, in the context of C19? I mean, what else do you foresee is going to be key issues as we emerge from a lockdown?
Well, I think the regulations which were brought in on the 25th of March will be important. So that's Regulation 5.1, and I mean, people know them as the lockdown regulations. So Regulation 6 is essentially restriction on movement, Regulation 7 is a restriction on gathering, and Regulation 5 relates to essentially non-essential retail premises. And if you actually look at that closely and forensically, there's a prohibition on accessing premises unless it's really for the purposes of online delivery services. So by way of example, if you've got a break clause and you're a retailer, you ought not to be inviting a third party in to carry out work of refurbishment, reinstatement, so as to comply with the VP clause, because on one analysis, it's a criminal offence, and that's Regulation 9. So the thing I'd throw out there, I'm inviting people to be really careful about that and interpret the regulations and take advice on the regulations. It's something we've had to look at really closely, both from a landlord and a tenant base. Again, I think people have been quite sensible and collaborative about it, because an argument taken today, you've got to consider the impression which that will have 15 months down the line in front of a tribunal. And I don't think any tribunal, whether it's a court, expert or arbitrator, want people to be seen to be taking particularly opportunistic points during a pandemic.
One thing we haven't discussed at all is about service charge, is it? I was wondering whether we're going to see a few more service charge disputes. There'll be tenants that will be obviously looking to cut costs and be looking very carefully about the services and the cost of those services. This is obviously post-lockdown. Yeah,
I think that's natural. I mean, it all relates to cash flow, doesn't it? I mean, the reality is people are going to be nipping and tucking wherever they can. Landlords uncertain whether they're supposed to be undertaking a deep clean or not in relation to a shopping centre, taking advice in relation to that. So yeah, service charge would be fertile territory. I suppose sort of wrapping it all together on a more positive note, how do you think the retail sector is going to rebase itself looking forwards? Any particular views on your part?
Yeah, I suppose it's quite difficult to call, isn't it? But there's a lot of talk about how all the trends that we were seeing before all this broke are just accelerated. So, question whether retailers are going to need far more. We're seeing a lot of pop-ups, so a retailer is going to need a lot more flexible leases. A lot of chat around business rates with the government doing nothing before C19, so we're going to need more support. So maybe the government will accelerate that. A lot of talk about, we've seen a lot of kind of downsizing generally of property portfolios, haven't we? So it's obvious to say there'd be an acceleration of that trend. And you wonder about the IT. So, there's a lot of chatter at the moment about robots and robot shop assistants, and obviously in the distribution centres, an acceleration of that trend. So I suspect everything we were seeing before, but far quicker, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well, I suppose sort of wrapping it up, as ever, nice to see you.
Thanks, Andrew. And next time I'll be talking with Paul Verico, who's one of our health and safety experts, just to think about the implications arising as shops start to reopen over the next few weeks.